many are still grieving. Some families will be lost to one another forever. To those of you who face the difficulties of reconnecting with family and establishing ongoing relationships, we say sorry. We offer this apology in the hope that it will assist your healing and in order to shine a light on a dark period of our nation's history. To those who have fought for the truth to be heard, we hear you now.
You're listening to Adopt Perspective Podcast, a podcast for anyone affected by adoption. I'm your host and president of Jigsaw Queensland, Jo Sparrow. This podcast is a production of Jigsaw Queensland Post-Adoption Support Service. However, the views expressed are those of the people participating and not necessarily Jigsaw Queensland. The podcast discusses adult themes and listener discretion is advised. Today I have the pleasure of introducing someone very special to Jigsaw to you, our new CEO, Helen Angela Taylor. Helen has been in the CEO seat since July and has been an absolute gift to our organisation. She's an adoptee who discovered Jigsaw in 1991 after moving to Brisbane from Sydney. A few years later, she reunited with her mother and father and attended her first peer support group at Jigsaw in 2019, realising the power of the adoption community to support her healing. She has considerable experience in frontline social justice delivery in Queensland Government with the Department of Justice and Attorney General, Department of Corrective Services and the Office of the Adult Guardian. And she'll tell us some more about these roles shortly. Welcome to Adopt Perspective, Helen.
Thank you, Jo. Such a pleasure to be here today.
And Helen's actually here with me in person getting to meet the dog behind the scenes, so hopefully we don't hear him bark. Helen, how are you settling in at Jigsaw?
I knew this would be a rewarding job, but it's proven to be even more rewarding than I expected, which is great. When I start a new job, I always give myself 3 months to kind of get a feel for the place and the people. So I did that again in this role with Jigsaw, and it's kind of weird because although it's a new role and it's a new organisation for me to work in, it feels very familiar and comfortable, and that's probably because of the amazing people that I'm working with. It's also because what we do is not foreign to me. It's not like I need to learn a new business or learn a new system. What we do is something that I'm familiar with from my past experience and I have a real commitment to.
Yeah, it's been a perfect fit really from my perspective, watching you in the role. Now, you're personally impacted by adoption, and I mentioned earlier that you've used our services before you started working with us. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience?
Okay. So my first experience with Jigsaw Queensland actually goes back to 1991. So this is quite a story, so it'll take a few minutes to explain.
It's all right, we've got time.
So I left Sydney in 1990 when I was 24, and I was in a really dark place. I was in my third year of anorexia, which was taking a toll on me that I was oblivious to at the time. But also emotionally, I was very fragile. So I left Sydney in 1990 essentially to escape my past and escape my adoptive parents, who were probably the most significant symbols of my past that I was wanting to escape. So although I'd already moved out of home in Sydney, my adoptive parents were still quite relentless in their criticism and their need to control me. So part of me thought moving interstate would solve that problem. It didn't, but it took me a while to realise that that wasn't the solution to that problem. So when I moved to Brisbane, I got a little one-bedroom unit in Windsor and settled in and started looking for work. And by chance, I don't know how I found out, I discovered that the laws about adoption had changed. So the New South Wales legislation, which applies to my birth and my adoption, changed in 1990. And realising it had changed, I became curious, and I remember calling Jigsaw Queensland to kind of get the lay of the land, find out what it means for adopted people like me. So the person I spoke to, whose name I don't recall, was just oozing generosity and kindness and understanding, and they got, you know, exactly how I was feeling. So I got some advice from them, and my recollection of that legislation was that it created some kind of contact register where, for example, I could express an interest and put my details on the register, I think, and the other party could do that. So I did apply for my adoption information from New South Wales, but I'd already seen a bit of that. And the reason I'd seen a bit of that is when I was doing my undergrad at Macquarie University in Sydney, in my third year, I wrote a paper on the effects of adoption on relinquishing mothers. And that was a way for me to intellectualise my emotional journey and try and get some information and get a bit of an understanding. And as part of my research, I went to Crown Street Women's Hospital where I was born and met with a social worker. And that social worker, I got access to information through that meeting, that research opportunity I had. But now what I do remember is that when speaking with Jigsaw, it was about the veto thing. So I remember feeling some frustration and anger about that, thinking, how on earth does that make sense? That the laws have changed to provide access to information, and yet I can still be denied that information. So my understanding was at the time I couldn't contact my birth mother directly. So I knew what I was doing, what I was intending to then do was wrong. It was illegal, based on my understanding of what Jigsaw had told me in Queensland, but what I gleaned from the New South Wales situation. So fortunately, my birth mother is Russian. So although my surname now as an adopted person is Taylor, my name would have been very different and very Russian and very colourful had I not been adopted. So I just started looking for myself. I went to the electoral rolls, and I also checked the phone book, the old-fashioned white pages. And of course, there were two names in the white pages. So I wrote to both of them, I think, and found my birth mother. And now I've already gone off track. My apologies.
That's right.
So that was my initial experience with Jigsaw Queensland. And then I went down the reunion path with my mother and my father a few years later. What was different then for me was, well, I'm a very stubborn person and a very independent person, and I felt like I needed to do it myself. Looking back now, I can see that my reunion journey could have been different, better, if I'd had someone to support me on that journey. I chose to do it on my own. I think I believed at the time I had to do it on my own. I don't know that I was open to support because of how I was feeling emotionally. So I went down the reunion path, and then that didn't go well initially, and that was quite devastating for me. And I think I just shut down then emotionally around my adoption. I was fully functional in every other way. I was working hard. I was delivering at work. I was performing all the roles that we perform in society, but inside I just kind of shut down. The shutting down is hard to talk about because it probably sounds a bit weird, but I think I shut down for a long period of time, and the adoption things kept cropping up as I was navigating life, but I kept pushing it down again because I was scared to face my feelings. I was scared to feel the pain that I felt in relation to my initial separation from my mother, but also my very challenging adoptive family experience. So then all of that came to a head, as it does, in February 2019 when I experienced a quite significant betrayal by a member of my adoptive family, which kind of threw me, and I had a lot of difficulty reconciling that, and I tried to see it from the other party's perspective. I tried to be compassionate. I couldn't make sense of what had happened. So then, fortunately, July 2019, I decided to go to my first support group with Jigsaw Queensland. And that was actually really hard for me to do, but I felt quite desperate. I didn't know what else to do. So I remember turning up at the support group and parking across the road outside and talking myself out of going inside because of my fear. And that fear was about people wouldn't understand, people would judge me, I was raised by parents who told me I was too sensitive and too emotional all the time, so I felt that was going to happen in the support group. And also because throughout my life, when I have tried to talk to people about it who aren't adopted, they haven't understood, and they haven't responded in a way that's made me feel supported. So I was terrified. So I had a panic attack in my car and was talking myself out of going inside. But then I knew I wasn't safe to drive home because of how I was feeling. So I calmed down, and then I talked myself into it. I thought, I'll just go this once, you do it, prove that it's not worthwhile, prove that it can't help, and went in. And it was just an amazing experience because I sat down in this room, circle of chairs, and there was a beautiful, warm, friendly woman there and a beautiful, warm, friendly man, and sat down and people settled, and then the chairs were filled in this circle, and then the two facilitators explained what the group was about and the rules of engagement for the group. And then people started going around the room introducing themselves. So a woman to the left of me, I'll never forget her, sitting on the sofa, introduced themselves, and then she looked at me and the tears just came up, and I just felt like an idiot, and I felt very conspicuous and very scared and very unsafe. And then I just said my name, the year I was adopted, and some brief snippets about me or my adoption. But as I started talking, even in those brief snippets, everyone in the room was nodding and looking at me. And so I stopped and then passed on to the next person, and then it kept going around the room. And then I just started crying, and I was just crying with relief and crying with appreciation that there was a place I could be myself and I could talk honestly about how I felt. So I continued doing that off and on for the 2 hours of my first meeting, and the kindness in that room is indescribable. I can't find a word to describe that, and the connection. And when I drove home, I felt like a different person. I know this will sound all dramatic and whatever, but it was so real. I felt like a different person. And I felt a sense of relief that I don't think I'd ever felt before.
Yeah. I can relate to so much of that. Just that feeling of you're not alone. There's other people who feel something similar to what you feel. And just having made that connection is incredible. How's your life changed for the better because of the services you received at Jigsaw?
Okay. It's changed a lot, actually, but not in a dramatic way. It's been kind of incremental in terms of how my life has improved. So after that first support group, because they're held monthly or bi-monthly, depending on which ones you choose to attend, things kind of would fall apart between meetings for me. And then I would tell myself that the meeting was a waste of time and there wasn't a solution to how I was feeling. But then I went back. I kept going back. And I think if I hadn't kept going back, no, that's not the right way to say it. I know that I couldn't have made progress had I stopped going to the support group meetings in terms of what I needed at that time. Because what the support groups helped me do is discover or realise that I have considerable unresolved anger in relation to being taken from my mother, who didn't want to give me up, and then being raised by strangers who didn't care for me in a loving way. So the support group process over the last 5 years now has helped me navigate those really uncomfortable emotions, particularly my anger. So that's kind of a general, so I'm still engaged with that process. I still go to the support groups, even on the days I think I'm not in the mood for it, because even on the days where I think I'm not in the mood for it, which is my way of being afraid of my feelings that might come up, I actually will connect with a stranger at the support group, or I can share something with a stranger at a support group and realise that it's helpful for them. And that's amazing.
Yeah.
Because that's what I've been getting from the group. So the chance to randomly do that and maybe help someone else make sense of something is a fabulous feeling. But I think to sum it up, the way my life has changed, there are three things that stand out for me. So I now have an understanding of the impact of adoption on me, which I didn't have. I always thought that I was the problem. I didn't find a way, even as an adult, to reconcile my mother not wanting me. Couldn't find a way to reconcile that. So I now understand the impact of adoption on me and how it's informed so many of my choices and decisions over my life and so many of my behaviours, and how it's impacted my mental health every day. I'm also better off because I now am supported to navigate my own journey, and that was happening in the support groups. Now being CEO of Jigsaw, it's happening in a deeper way, a stronger way, because I'm part of an amazing team of people with both lived experience and professional experience. So every day I'm getting this beautiful support from people, little ways, big ways, just amazing. And I think the third way I've benefited is that, or how my life has changed, is I'm now for the first time in my life feeling empowered to face my truth about my past. And I do believe that until we understand our stuff, it's hard to heal from it or recover from it. I think we need to know before we can heal. And I've been resisting the knowing all of my life because of my fear about facing the depths of those feelings, whether it was grief or loss or pain or anger. But now I feel able to do that, which is a wonderful feeling.
Yeah. And something I'm really excited about for you is, so I'm almost at 10 years with my professional connection with Jigsaw. And my understanding of myself and adoption generally has grown exponentially over that time, which has been really helpful and healing for me too. So even in the process of working for and helping others, that's really impactful for ourselves as well. And I'm really excited for that for you. So now just switching gears into your professional work, you have a strong background in social justice work. Can you tell us a bit more about this?
I've had a really interesting career in Queensland Government. So when I fled Sydney for Brisbane, it was just after the recession, and I didn't realise what recessions mean for employment. So I had trouble finding work, and I ended up applying for a job, just general work with Queensland Government. And my first placement there was in the Director of Public Prosecutions Office, which is part of the Department of Justice and Attorney General. And I was one of their first non-legal paralegals, so instructing in court in District and Supreme Courts in Brisbane, all the criminal matters that were dealt with. So by its nature, it was very interesting anyway. One of my superpowers is admin, I'm kind of the queen of admin. So
yes, I would agree with that.
So I really enjoyed all the paperwork, admin, docs, exhibits, all that stuff you had to coordinate to have ready for court. And I also enjoyed the challenge of getting the work done before 10 o'clock when court started, and getting the work done after 4 p.m. when court finished, because you're in court all day. It was a really dynamic, exciting place to work. What I didn't know was happening at the time, though, was that things were changing in terms of government policy for victims of crime. So I started in the DPP in 92. In 95, the Queensland Government introduced the Criminal Offence Victims Act 1995, which was the first declaration of fundamental principles of justice for victims of crime. And that involved information support and referral services being set up for victims of crime, and introduction of a compensation scheme, which, interestingly enough, is stuff that Queensland Government is currently navigating many years on. So what's happening now, I can say from an informed position, is not new policy. It was new policy in the 1990s. It's just that there's been a change in political commitment or will towards supporting victims of crime. That's changed over the years. So I began working in the Victim Support Service, and it was such an exciting time because everything we were doing was new. So we had to consider, how do victims of crime get information? The police had to consider that, DPP had to consider that, corrections had to consider that. And by the time all of that was established, and by the time I left there, I'd ended up working with a team of social workers. So I'm not a social worker. I was the only not professionally qualified person in the team, and an amazing manager. And I worked with victims of crime who'd experienced the most traumatic events like rape, families left behind after a murder, dangerous driving causing death, the most horrific things that none of us think will ever happen to us. And I was supporting these people through the court process. And sometimes those relationships went on for 18 months or 2 years, because that's how long the court process could take. So you get to know these people very intimately, very quickly, and then it's a very bizarre relationship. So I met some incredible people and learnt a lot from them about fear and trauma and grief and loss and pain and recovery and stamina, and just incredible. But my manager one day took me into her office, and it was something, I must have had a challenge with a client, and I was just seeking her advice about how I could navigate appropriate boundaries with that client so that they stayed safe and I was kind of maintaining my boundaries. And the discussion of trauma came up, and I don't remember then ever having had a conversation with anyone in my life about trauma. It wasn't a word that was in my vocabulary. And my very wise manager gave me some feedback that my clients connected with me because I could talk. I understood their trauma. I could talk that language. And I said to her, I don't understand what you mean. And she then referred to my adoption, and she said, you've had that experience, Helen, you know how that feels. So they feel safe with you. And that was a turning point for me in terms of understanding myself personally, and why I could sit comfortably with people and talk about death and grief and murder and crimes. Like, I could sit and listen to people who were talking about that stuff. Although I'd fortunately not been a victim of crime, I could understand how they felt, or I could empathise with how they felt. So that was an incredible experience in the victim support service. I only left that work. I loved that work. I only left that work because then an opportunity came up in Corrective Services to start what was then called the Concerned Persons Register, now called the Victims of Crime Register, which was the first time our correction system was providing information to victims about offenders, releases, parole dates. So it was very innovative stuff in its day. So I set up that register and worked there for a couple of years. And that again was rewarding. It had different challenges, but because I'd worked in the victim support service, a lot of my clients in the Concerned Persons Register were people I had existing relationships with. So there was a familiarity and an ongoing sense of connection, which was really nice. Then probably the most relevant area, other relevant areas, when I started working in the disability sector. So I've worked in disability in Queensland in two organisations. One was the Office of the Public Guardian, used to be called the Office of the Adult Guardian, now the Public Guardian. So I started there as a community visitor in 2007, and that was a professional casual role where, along with many other community visitors, I was employed to essentially inquire into, investigate allegations of abuse, neglect or exploitation for adults with disability. This is before the NDIS. Essentially, the service was a rights protection and abuse prevention service. So we'd be advocating for individuals' rights. And these are often adults with maybe an intellectual disability who didn't have verbal communication. So advocating for someone who can't verbally communicate their needs is a challenge. It's about drawing on their support network, assessing their environment, talking with their family. So it was an incredibly interesting job, a very important job, because people with disability can be very isolated in our community, and don't have people who can speak on their behalf. So I did that for 4 years, and then the opportunity to manage that service came up. So I applied for that job and I was successful in that role, and then worked in that service, that statewide service, as the manager for 4 years, which was incredible in terms of learning more about advocacy and more about human rights and more about access and equity for everybody in our community, but particularly people with disability. Then my second role in disability sector was in the Queensland Government department to transition a team in southeast Queensland from our state funded service into the new NDIS, which was an unknown at that time. We didn't know what the NDIS would look like. So that was more a leadership role than an operational role. So that was my focus then, was on my team more than the clients. But I still got to meet some amazing clients and work with some amazing stakeholders as part of that journey. So when this opportunity for the CEO role came up this year, I really didn't think I was interested in another job of this nature, to be honest, but it was perfect timing, and I think it's meant to be, because I can see everything that I've learned from my previous roles in social justice, and the things that come to mind for me are advocating for people's rights, supporting people whose voices aren't heard, understanding the lifelong impact of trauma, and, as I said before, being comfortable to sit and talk about grief and loss in all its forms. So part of me still can't believe that I have this opportunity now with Jigsaw. It's still a bit of a pinch yourself kind of moment, to be honest.
Yeah. And it was all of that awesome experience that I saw, and the more I got to know you, I just thought you were the perfect fit for our organisation. And sometimes I feel like it's a perfect storm, even my own scenario, all my skills and experience that I've drawn from everywhere from, and you would know yourself, even from your crappy little jobs when you're a teenager or whatever, you draw on all of those and you bring them into your work at Jigsaw, and it is just a really nice way to see it all happen. It's the cherry on top, I think. We're so lucky to have you.
Thank you.
So something that we both have in common is a need to do meaningful work. And in our case, our work at Jigsaw has the additional element of being work that we're personally impacted by. What does it mean to you to be working in this space when you're impacted by it?
It means a lot. I probably can't overstate the significance of it for me at this stage in my life and on my journey as an adopted person. So professionally, it's an opportunity for me to apply everything I've learned in government about business management, social services, and leading people. And I didn't think I'd have that chance again to contribute in that way. So that means a lot to me professionally, because I find that work really rewarding. Leading people and leading positive change is something I've always found really rewarding. Personally, it feels like a gift for me, because I'm in exactly the right place I need to be to do this job, to both give and receive. And I mean that in the sense of what I've learnt from my colleagues in Jigsaw is it's a reciprocal relationship. And I'm really loving that energy of reciprocity in terms of sharing information, sharing experiences, being able to debrief, being able to support each other, getting off a phone call with a person who's in considerable distress and sitting in that space and talking with a colleague about it and remembering the importance of what we do. And so ironically, or inevitably, or whatever the right word is, I wouldn't have got to this point had it not been for the last 5 years of the support groups. So had I not gone after that first support group, had I not gone back, I don't know where I'd be. I don't think I would have grown at all. I don't think I would have grown at all as an adoptee or as a human being. And I think what this role has also taught me or reminded me is the power and importance of lived experience in social services. So I think we know that as a community now, because I've seen that in different sectors. But now that I'm doing it myself, so as a person with lived experience of the impact of adoption, I think it's really, really important. But I don't mean it's important to the exclusion of others. I just think it has to be part of the process. Lived experience has to be part of the process in every level. Federal, state, local, community, lived experience has to be driving decisions about adoption moving forward. It has to be informing policy. It's just absolutely critical.
Yeah.
So, and I think I'm still understanding the importance of that. So I think I'll continue to be a strident advocate for lived experience in our space, because I know from my government experience how easy it is for any government to draft policy in a vacuum. Because there are so many things that impact good policy in inverted commas, and those things are funding or political will or voter preference. Like, there's so many variables that impact policy, and time and again in government I saw good policy being diluted by all those other variables. So my view now is that as long as lived experience is driving policy design or decisions, we have a higher chance of having appropriate policy for our sector.
Yeah.
I think I also am learning, and you and I were only talking about this recently, Jo, the risks of lived experience. So what I'm learning is the need to have an environment where people with lived experience are supported to do their best, because what I'm still getting used to with Jigsaw is every day I could potentially be triggered by something I'm hearing. And that's why being in such a supportive team in the office is important, because we talk every day about how things are and what's happening. So I have that, and my colleagues, we all have that in the office. And I think had it been 10 years ago, I wouldn't have had the ability to navigate that. But now I feel strong enough to navigate that because of the supports that are already in place, but also the journey I've been on, particularly for the last 5 years, in terms of being able to face my truth because of the support I've had through Jigsaw. So there are risks there for people with lived experience in our space, but I'm not the first bunny rabbit to identify those risks. And I also want to acknowledge all the incredible human beings who have been navigating that for decades, who've achieved the incredible reforms that have been achieved in legislation and programs and service delivery, because it takes a toll on people to keep giving and fighting and advocating when it's also their own battle, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's very important to have a lot of self-care and boundaries, and to be getting support while you're doing any kind of advocacy work as someone with lived experience. So since you've been in the CEO seat, you've been able to view our work from a new perspective. What are some of the observations about the impacts of adoption on our clients and wider community that you've had?
I've already said this before a few times, that not in this podcast, when I've been talking to people, that I've had a chance to speak to hundreds of people now in the last 4 months or so, and each person has their own unique story. Like, it blows my mind how unique each individual's story is, like the detail and the memories they have and the things they recall and the things that are important to them. Yet we all have our own unique story, but the themes are universal.
Yeah.
And what I'm trying to manage in my practice in the office when I'm talking with people and supporting colleagues is to never forget the uniqueness of each story. So I will always honour the uniqueness of each story, because there's a risk when a community group has things in common that we can start to devalue or desensitize ourselves to the uniqueness of each person's story. So I'm determined not to do that when I meet new people. So I'm trying to honour each person's unique story, whilst also recognising the themes. And the themes that have come across for me already are themes of identity. So for me and for other people, that seems to be the struggle of finding out who we really are, and that's in part our nature. It's also our nurture, and balancing. It's so hard. It's so hard, I think, for particularly adopted people to get a strong sense of identity, which I think is really important if you want to engage in a meaningful way in relationships with other people. Knowing who we are is important, essential for us to share ourselves, our authentic selves, with other people. Grief and loss are universal themes as well, and I already had an ability to talk about grief and loss from the work I did with victims of crime. But what I've discovered with Jigsaw is the disenfranchised nature of our grief. That we've never had processes to honour our grief, to recognise it, to honour it, to commemorate it, to mark it, all those normal social norms that apply in other grief situations, like losing a loved one or losing a pet. We have processes, ritual ceremonies in place. Those of us who carry the grief of losing our mother at birth, and all the subsequent losses that come from that, about connection and family and mirroring and all that kind of stuff, it's very unique. It's very unique for people who are adopted. The other things that I've noticed are attachment. So how all of us who are impacted by adoption try to navigate secure attachment with people when we may not have had a secure attachment at the start with our adoptive family. And again, why that's really interesting for me is it's not something that then stops, like it doesn't stop at age 5 and stop at age 10. It keeps impacting us until we have an understanding of it. Self-esteem is a big one too, in that I've met a lot of people impacted by adoption who don't seem to value themselves or value their unique contribution or see themselves objectively for the amazing human beings they are, and that saddens me, but I also understand that. And then there's the themes of trust, and trust is so important for relationships, whether they be intimate, close relationships or social connections. And if as an adopted person you haven't felt safe, you haven't been able to trust people, then it's really, really hard to do that later in life. It's really hard to do that. And I think for some people the effort required to learn how to do that might not be something they have the energy for, which can then impact our social isolation and a myriad of other things in terms of basic trust. Now, the wider adoption community, I smile when I think of the people I've met, because I think it's my responsibility in this role as CEO I feel like I've been handed the baton from certainly our previous CEO, Dr. Trevor Jordan, but also from the management committee for Jigsaw and the broader community who've been working with Jigsaw for 48 years. So I want to, in taking on that baton, I know my responsibility about maintaining the foundation that is Jigsaw, and if possible, building and growing on that if I can, if the team can. So the adoption community make my heart smile because of their courage, their resilience, their ballsiness. I don't know if that's a word.
It works. Good descriptor.
Their relentless pursuit of justice, the relentless pursuit of truth. And I'm starting to get a sense of, again, the toll that may have taken on people individually and maybe their families over the years. So if any of them are listening now, I just want them to know that I respect that, and I will honour that and continue that in terms of what Jigsaw does in terms of advocacy moving forward.
Yeah. Gave me goosebumps. So can you describe to us how our team of professional staff and peer support volunteers make Jigsaw a safe and welcoming environment?
This is an easy one. For me, it starts with the people. So the people, I believe that people create an environment, and I've had many experiences in the past of seeing that work well or not work well. So I think we need to have the right people for our purpose. And that's why we've had a deliberate targeted recruitment strategy this year to build our current team. So we have the most amazing team now.
We sure do.
Yeah, they're just amazing, aren't they? So they're incredibly diverse, but dedicated. So diversity, which means obviously difference, but yet they're all dedicated, which I love. We've discovered as we've gotten to know each other that we have shared values. So there were no explicit questions for each of the interviews to recruit this team about their values, but naturally people got a chance to talk to their values as they were answering questions. And I remember being with you and sitting in these interviews and just feeling their values shine through, which helped us decide who were the right people to work for Jigsaw. They bring different experience, but have had similar life lessons, which I find intriguing, and creates its own sense of connection. And I think the best evidence is our recently agreed values, and those values are safety, choice, integrity, and compassion. And the conversations that we've had as a team around values generally, but those specific values that best represent Jigsaw, because they're not our only values, they're the key values. There's a real synchronicity there with all of us in the team, and we're all comfortable to own those values and perform according to those values. And that's not just in client-facing contact, that's within the team in terms of us having, for example, individual integrity and making sure each other feels safe in the team, in the work we do, which is really important work. And the compassion is not just for our clients, it's also for each other in that work. So I really do think it's mainly the people that has created the safe and the welcoming environment. And for me, that manifests every day when I hear a colleague pick up the phone and I can very quickly tell the phone call is from a new caller because of the nature of how my colleague is responding. And you can just hear it in their voice. It's just beautiful. And definitely the people is my answer to that one.
Yeah, absolutely. We have an absolutely fantastic team. I'm so proud of them. So our next 3 years at Jigsaw are going to be huge and exciting, including celebrating our 50th anniversary. And the Management Committee recently endorsed a 2025 to 27 strategic plan. What can you tell us about our vision as we step forward?
Okay. How lucky am I to be the CEO of Jigsaw Queensland leading up to our 50th anniversary? I feel like I've cheated everybody else who's done all the hard work before me, to be honest.
It's all right, they'll get an invite.
I'll get an invite. I do consider myself really lucky to be in this role at this time. So our strategic plan, as you said, was recently endorsed by the Management Committee, and our vision for the next 3 years from 25 to 27 is empowering people to understand and heal from the impact of adoption. That sounds like a really broad remit for us as an organisation, but I think for a vision it needs to be broad because it leaves us open to explore and deliver whatever our community most needs in the next 3 years. I think because I'm new to the not-for-profit sector, because my previous experience was in government, and then before government when I was young, as you said, those crappy jobs when you're young in the private sector and hospitality and that kind of stuff. So not-for-profit is new for me. So I recognise that the not-for-profit sector is precarious and unpredictable. And it's unpredictable because governments change, which means policies change, which means priorities change, and which means funding can change and funding can be cut instantly. Like, it's an incredibly precarious position for an organisation to be in when they're delivering frontline services. But also the needs of our community keep evolving. And that's probably a new realisation for me. My opinion is that people who aren't impacted by adoption probably think adoption is an issue in the past. They probably think, it happened then, so those of us impacted by it need to move on or get over it or whatever. But what I know is that being impacted by adoption is not something just from the past. I've often had a sense from people in the past when I've wanted to talk about adoption with non-adopted people that they'd really rather I not talk about it. Mm-hmm. It's like they don't understand why I keep talking about it, which means they don't understand how important it is to me.
Yeah.
But it's not a past issue because adoption has a lifelong impact on everybody involved, and there's daily mental health challenges for parents and children lost to adoption, which are significant. Mm-hmm. For me, it's like living with unhealed wounds, untold stories, and unknown histories, things that can never be recovered, but you have to kind of make sense of. It's hard. It's actually hard for me to explain in words, but the reason I think our sector is evolving and our community is evolving and the needs of our community is evolving is because the impacts from past decisions many, many years ago are now being felt by siblings of adopted people and children of adopted people. So an adopted person who has children, so the adopted person already has all this loss of what they don't know about their past, going back generations, they may never know. And then their children inherit that. Mm-hmm. So adoption's not a point in time in the past. It's a generational issue that it will continue. And so people will continue to be impacted by it in some way, I guess. I'm not sure if that answered your question.
It does. I mean, and we're not that old. Like, I'm in my 50s. This wasn't ancient history. This is recent history.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, and it's still having an impact on our families today.
Yeah, absolutely. Most definitely. Look, Chief, that's what I call you, Chief. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing a little bit about your personal and career experience and our vision for Jigsaw. I couldn't be more thrilled with you and our dedicated team, and I'm just so happy that you walked into our lives and that and happy for you to be joining us for the journey ahead with Jigsaw.
Oh, thank you, Jo. That means the world to me, and thank you for today. It's been lovely talking to you.
And thank you to our listeners for joining us. Meanwhile, do you have a story that you'd like to share with us? If you'd like to be interviewed for the podcast, jump onto the main podcast page of the Jigsaw Queensland website and complete the prospective guest form that you'll find there. And note that Adopt Perspective can be and is listened to by people all over the world. Bye for now. Thanks for listening to the Adopt Perspective podcast. If you'd like to find out more, go to the podcast page on www.jigsawqueensland.com and you'll find a wealth of information and resources on the website. If you reside in Queensland, you can reach Jigsaw Queensland's Forced Adoption Support Service on toll-free 1800 210313, or you can call Jigsaw on 07 33 58 6666. If you live in another state of Australia, you can still call the Forced Adoption Support Service number and your call will be answered by the Forced Adoption Support Service in the state that you're calling from. In every other state, Relationships Australia operates this service. A big thank you to Matt Sparrow for composing and recording our original theme music. Until next time, I'm Jo Sparrow saying farewell from Adopt Perspective, a podcast for anyone affected by adoption.